The first Australian soldiers to serve in Vietnam were 30 members of the Australian Army training team, all highly trained officers and warrant officers with combat experience. They arrived in Vietnam at the end of July 1962. In the 10 years that followed, 60,000 Australians saw duty in Vietnam with the Army, Navy and Air Force. 523 died as a result of the war. Another 3,500 were wounded or injured. Australia was committed to supporting the American campaign to defeat the communist regime in North Vietnam and its guerrilla army, the Viet Cong. At home, the war became increasingly unpopular, especially after the government introduced the National Service Act in November 1964, compelling 20-year-old male Australians to register and then be subject to a conscription ballot based on their birth dates. More than 15,300 national servicemen were sent to Vietnam. 200 were killed. Australia also committed civilian medical teams of surgeons and nurses between 1964 and 72. As a diplomatic gesture under the Southeast Asia Treaty Organisation, 240 doctors and 210 nurses were employed by the Department of External Affairs to assist in South Vietnamese civilian hospitals. The nurses experienced a very different type of war.
I'd always wanted to work somewhere where I felt I was really needed, in a third world country, or somewhere where I felt I could do more and, feel that there was perhaps someone that there was not as many people there to do it.
What sort of preparation did you get to go to?
Very little. We only had a matter of weeks' notice. We were picked up by official cars and flown to Canberra and had a day's indoctrination of our role there and how we went to have male boots in our corridors and we met as a team, most of us, and they took us to lunch and we had the history of Vietnam and the war and that sort of thing. Yeah.
That wasn't much in the way of preparation.
No, it wasn't. And it's certainly, my father was very anti-me going. He was a Second World War veteran and he said, leave it to the people. You're too young, you leave it to people. I said, they've got more sense. They won't go.
Was it?
It was a Vietnamese hospital in town. And we weren't allowed to look after the maternity patients. We looked after the operating theatre and the recovery area and the general ward sort of thing, yeah.
And
I looked after their recovery, come intensive care, if you want to call it that, and the lack of equipment was just incredible.
Girl, I remember very clearly, I can still see her face, a bar girl, and she had no family. She'd been disowned by her family and she was working in the bar, and I can't recall what was the matter with her, but she had no one to care for her. And one night we used to go back at night to do the rounds and give out the medications, and there was a rat eating her nose, and the people in the next bed had their families look after them, but no one made any effort to help this girl. She died that night.
A rat was actually eating her?
That rat was gnawing on her nose.
In bed, in the hospital?
Yes, and as I said, there were patients on the other side who had family to care for them, but no one had made an effort to remove the rat. That was really confronting.
And then somebody came running past, an American came running past and said, you guys had better get back to your hospital because it's got a whole pile of dead bodies on the lawn. I said, what? So we leapt back in the vehicle, threw our clothes back on, threw our gear back on, our working gear, drove back to Leloy Hospital, and there were indeed dead bodies all over the ground in front of the hospital. I couldn't believe it. So we walked into a little operating theatre suite that most of us worked in. I worked in the theatres some of the time, but I also worked in a clinic. The clinic wasn't working, nothing was working. Unit, because we had the keys to that, let ourselves in. And then suddenly hundreds of people, not thousands, hundreds of people came flooding from everywhere and just tried to keep pushing their way into our little unit.
Australian soldiers went on patrols and fought in Vietnam in tight-knit units, side by side, regardless of whether they were regular army or national servicemen. The Australian forces were assigned to Phuoc Thi province on the southern coast, about 40 kilometres from Saigon, now called Ho Chi Minh City. Much of the province was covered in rainforest, but rice paddies were abundant. The main Australian base was on a hill called Nui Dat, surrounded by abandoned rubber plantations.
My platoon, we were very lucky. We had just as many contacts as the others, but we didn't have anyone wounded or killed. We had no one got medevac home with malaria, which the other platoons had quite a few sent home, so we had the 12 months with no big problems. In our platoon, we probably had about half our soldiers were national servicemen, but if I asked you to pick out the national servicemen, you wouldn't be able to. They blended in good, there were no problems, and in fact the national servicemen were probably a bit older than the regular army blokes, because they had to register when they were 21, so by the time we got them they were 22, whereas the young volunteers could go overseas when they were 18. We used to go out for up to 2 weeks at a time, and we'd carry as much rations for probably about a week, and after about a week we'd get resupplied, and because we used to get resupplied with stuff that we didn't think we were getting. Because we used to come across some old American camps and find a lot of rubbish with ice cream containers and that. We said, what's going on here? And all of a sudden we're getting resupplied, we get ice cream.
Things that was, I suppose, unique in Vietnam about the Australian base was that there was no Vietnamese allowed in there, none. Whereas the Americans made use of a lot of local help for cleaning and that sort of stuff. We did all that. We looked after ourselves completely, so there was no Indigenous help available to us, and not that we wanted it, but that was, I suppose, one of the good things about the camp at Nui Dat. It was incredibly well fortified, multiple layers of barbed wire. Very, very, very difficult place to get into. Having to put your mates, your dead mates, on a chopper to have them evacuated is probably one of the hardest things I ever did, I think. Because you knew these guys, you'd served with them and you'd lived with them for, months and months and months on end, and to lose somebody, there's nothing harder.
They said to me, are you in Rio Wing? And I said, yeah. So I said, grab your gear, you're going. So I went straight into Mascot, jumped on a plane full of us. We flew to Singapore, and we're in polyesters. And when we got to Singapore, we all had to change our shirts to a civvy shirt. So we all came off a plane with black shoes, polyester strides, psychedelic shirts and whatever, so that we didn't show that we were in the armed forces going through Singapore. So it was some political thing. Anyway, I got a card and posted it to my parents, telling them where I was or where I was going. And that was all right. Went to Vietnam and went to reinforcement, 1 ARU, reinforcement unit. And I was there for a while. We used to go do the patrols out the wire and the clearing patrols around the area and whatever. And then they posted me to 4 RAR as a reinforcement. I came home on R&R and I got married. Went to Tassie to show my parents my new bride. And that card I posted in Singapore still hadn't arrived.
As it turned out, the Tet Offensive was starting at midnight that night. So a couple of other platoons came in, B Company and 4 Platoon B Company, and a couple of other platoons from, I think it was C Company.
But of course, you might well have been there yourself, had you?
Well, for 24 hours or so, I would have been, yeah. Another day I would have been.
How do you feel about that? That still really concerns you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you think about it all the time. Come 16th of February, I always celebrate my second birthday. I reckon I got out of it. But I still remember Bluey and Vic, and we went to Canberra just recently for a memorial down there, and I laid a wreath for both of them.
And we lost a couple of APC crew were killed, a couple more hit mines, and then I hit a mine also.
And what happened?
We went bang and I went bang. And the next, they had me dusted off by a dust-off helicopter. They took me to Bung Tower Hospital, where I was treated. I was badly burnt, and I had my jaw ripped away from down from my face. I had my teeth all broken up. I've had crowns and caps and plugs put in for my teeth, especially the top row. They're false. They're all screwed in. They built a false top jaw for me out of special material. And I was the first Australian casualty to have a thing called Pfizer Hex. They used to bathe me and put this Pfizer Hex on me after they'd bathe me to get the black powder burns and all that off. And they do that once or twice a day. When they put over the blisters and everything, when they broke, they put the Pfizer Hex on me twice a day. And it used to pain like it was unbelievable. I was the first Australian casualty. It was discovered in a laboratory in Houston, Texas. And they used to give me morphine shots, and I got too gun and I got it hooked onto the morphine. And when I'd wait till the pain had just about gone, and I'd ask him for me shot of morphine. And I'd be laying in the bed with my arms up like this and my chin back, and they used to call me the Scarecrow.
Huh.
And we didn't come away unscathed. I've got serious PTSD. My PTSD is a good one in some respects because I'm super active, super hyper. So I seem to get myself involved in a lot of activities just to hide all that other stuff, put it aside. I don't get on the grog and drugs like the other side of PTSD does. I've had 2 doses of cancer, and my wife's had multiple miscarriages, which we put down to Agent Orange. No one will admit it, but it's fairly evident. DVA has supported me with that, with those conditions. So, in a way, that they're inadvertently saying, yes, you've got these conditions because of your service in Vietnam, and was probably Agent Orange. Yeah.
Patrolling was all very slow. You weren't walking at normal pace. You were patrolling very slowly. The thicker the jungle got, the slower you did, because you just had to work your way through it. We did not use machetes or anything like that to cut our way through the jungle because they make just way too much noise. We basically used secateurs, and the forward scout would basically cut his way through while keeping an eye out for any enemy that might turn up in front of him. And then people behind the forward scout would slowly widen the track and we'd just follow. 5 or 6 day turnaround, so you'd come back in off your ops, you'd get cleaned up. You'd usually have a beer and feed, bit of a booze up that night. Then we would go and, if our ammunition was getting too old, we'd go and blow it all off, then get issued with new ammunition. Then we'd go down to Bung Tower, mainly for 36 hours. Have plenty of things to beer and enjoy the local sights, and then get trucked back to Nui Dat. Then you'd probably go on a Red Reaction Force for a couple of days, then back out into the jungle.
And on the way in, there was a group of Save Our Sons women, and I got bashed with an umbrella. Now, that was not very attractive to me. These are the same people that voted the government of the day in, and here they are, taking violence against people that they don't want to have violence.
Right.
So, yeah, lots of strange things around that time.
And as you say, it must have been so disappointing to come home and find there wasn't that sort of public support, and in your case, sheer hostility.
You quickly learnt that you never ever displayed any ideas that you were there, never talked about it. You didn't wear your RSL badge on your coat or anything like that. It was all gone, one of those things, you just didn't do that.
But unfortunately that day, 3 civilians were killed in the crossfire. And all we could hear was choppers going past and firing, and what the hell. Anyway, this girl, one of them, the 2 oldies, I think, are farmers, they all panicked. The girl got on her bike, a young girl, and started riding, and she got hit the back of her head with a 50 cal from a horseshoe. I was very upset for the civilians because they would just happen to be caught in it, and the young girl and all that. And that to me was my moment of truth when I thought, this is how you really feel when something like that happens. Right? You suddenly realise this is reality. This is not just imagination or a bit of this is real.
I thought we did a real good job. We did real. I mean, if you go, when I was down the village for 2 hours, 3 hours, there'd be a lineup of about 50, 60 people waiting to get dental care or medical care. That's people don't say that. That's the things that we were doing there. That's what we were doing there. We weren't just out killing people all the time. So no, I didn't. I thought it was interesting to talk to some of those people. I met people who, in actual fact, served against us. One lady told me that when I was talking, she said she was Australians were moving through the area, and obviously a company, and she ducked down into her tunnel with her colleagues, but the Australians didn't move on. They used that as a base camp, and she was down there for 3 or 4 days in the tunnel, and she thought it was funny. She said the Americans would have left, and we would have come up and had a look at what they'd left behind, because they used to just throw all this stuff on the ground. Australians didn't. Australians used to either take it with them or bury it, and you wouldn't find it. So yeah, she thought it was really good, and she actually said that Australians on a couple of occasions had kept her people, and they were well treated.
And so we were Taylor and Charlie on day 2 on a convoy escort of artillery, I think it was, going up to the north of the province. And that was fine going up. The trucks were laden with rounds. That was pretty good. Just a slow trip up. Then on the way back, the trucks were empty. They went a bit faster. And we're Taylor and Charlie. Of course, in any convoy, Taylor and Charlie's usually trying to catch up all the time, which was the case. And we had a diff lock as we're going around a bend. And when spearing, the road was built up at that stage, at that point, around a curve. And the left-hand track locked and went straight across into the air. A 10-tonne of vehicle flying through the air, straight into a wet paddy field. Came to it from 80 kilometres an hour to 0, like that. Of course, all the antennas just snapped off. I can still remember, I can still hear the whirring of the radios as they all went off frequency, and all the ammunition went into the rice paddy. I had guns in my guts. Tomo was driving. He got a split chin out of it, and we're sitting in the middle of a rice paddy. And well, what do we do now?
There was 6 of us on a Qantas aircraft, and we landed at Tonsanut Airport, Tonsanut in Vietnam, Saigon. Anyway, we got there, and prior to that, they give us a bit of an intro thing on what to expect when you got there, and we were told that all the bad guys in Vietnam wore black pyjamas. So we're walking down the gangway of the airport, and all I could see was these people running around in black pyjamas, and there was this row after row after row of body bags. And I thought, what the hell have I walked into?
Whose body bags were they?
Yeah, Americans.
That would have been a shock to the system.
It was. You know, like when you go to a war zone like Vietnam, you expect to run into body bags every so often, but not that many in the one hit on day one.
I think it was probably a function of discipline. We were a team. We trained as a team, deployed as a team, stayed as a team, and came back as a team. Whereas the US system was individual replacement, and and we were in a very limited area. We had one province, I think, of the 44 in Vietnam to look after, and that was ours. And I've got to say, we did a very good job of it. And when we were leaving, I understand that villages were crying, which is sort of a pretty good final report card.
How long were you in Vietnam?
9 months. We got withdrawn early when it was decided that we would cease our combat commitment to Vietnam.
So you were one of the last ones there?
We were the last ones. We had the last major battle in Vietnam, which was quite big. We had 5 killed and 30-odd wounded in that. It's September 21, 1971. After the government said we weren't on combat operations anymore in Vietnam, well, guess what? I think the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, listened to the radio as well and heard that, so they decided to come and have a bit of a look, and unfortunately they ran into us 4 hours.
The Royal Australian Navy also played a role in Vietnam, in particular by providing a destroyer on a rotational basis to deploy with the United States 7th Fleet between 1967 and 71. HMAS Hobart and HMAS Perth came under fire on a number of occasions. Perth was hit once during its first deployment, and Hobart suffered 2 killed and 7 wounded when it was mistakenly hit by missiles from an American jet aircraft.
It was no different from anywhere else. You had your job to do, you did it, and it was hard sometimes and hot, very hot sometimes, and it happens.
What was your role on the ship?
I was engineering department.
So you're down on the bowels of the ship?
Well, luckily when we were hit, I was forward in the emergency station. So what it was, have 2 people up there and one forward and one after, shuttle the hatches if we come into fire. But the chap doing my job at the back was hit by shrapnel when we were hit, and I had to help carry him up the sick bay, and I didn't recognise him. The only reason I recognised him was the fact he had a geisha girl tattooed on his arm. I slept on the top bunk, he slept on the middle bunk. That's how I saw him every day. I didn't recognise him.
60,000 Australians saw duty in Vietnam with the Army, Navy and Air Force. 523 died as a result of the war. Another 3,500 were wounded or injured.